So what's your sense of the evening? I mean, you look at these exit polls, you look at the,
My sense of the evening is if Mitt Romney loses in Ohio, the president is reelected.
How do you think we got to that point?
Because it's a changing country. The demographics are changing. It's not a traditional America anymore. And there are 50% of the voting public who want stuff. They want things. And who is going to give them things? President Obama. The white establishment is now the minority. I'm a really white guy. When I was in Hawaii last week, I couldn't go in the sun. If I was in the sun for 3 minutes, my ears would fall off. All right? Now, I'm from Levittown, as you might know, out on Long Island. And my parents didn't have a lot of money. All right? Do I have white privilege? Am I privileged in any way under this banner?
Yes. Because none of the things that you've indicated speak to the issue of white privilege. White privilege isn't whether your skin pigmentation is strong or weak. It isn't how much money you have in the bank. It is you are the beneficiary of years of whites having an advantage in this country.
You know, if you have, for instance, a justice system that disproportionately targets people of color, let's say for drug offenses, and we know it does. We know black folks 4 times more likely to be arrested for a marijuana offense than white folks, even though the rates at which whites and blacks smoke weed are essentially identical. If that happens, and then you have people disproportionately getting locked up for that crime, and people see that, they see who's getting arrested on the news, they can see who's going to jail, they can see the prisons are disproportionately black and brown. They end up having this narrative in the back of their head, this story that tries to explain that outcome. Now, the reality is that outcome is the result of targeted racial profiling, etc. But keep in mind what every one of us has been taught, every cop, every teacher, every kid for that matter, since we were children, is wherever you end up in this country is all about you. So if you work hard, you'll make it. If you didn't make it, it's on you. If you end up in jail, it's because you're bad. If you didn't end up in jail, it's because you're good. So to some extent, the whole American narrative says that if people of color are filling our jails, it must be because they're more dangerous. And I think until we begin to really unravel that narrative and attack that narrative, and that means politicians have to attack it. That means that media have to attack it and not feed it with the way that they cover crime stories. That means that teachers have to attack it. If that doesn't happen, the Mike Browns of the world will always be at risk. I think it would be naive of us to think that the polarization can be laid at the feet of the president, because the president has walked very gingerly around these issues. And even when he has done so, he has been accused of being a bomb thrower on race. So when he gave what I think was a very tepid and frankly very timid, though it was praised as courageous, speech about race in Philadelphia in '08 after the Jeremiah Wright flap, where he essentially threw Jeremiah Wright under the bus in spite of the fact that Reverend Wright's version of American history is far more accurate than Barack Obama's version, far more accurate than most white Americans' version. But he was praised for it. And I remember thinking, that was a very tame speech, but he got attacked anyway as being divisive because he made the comment, as you'll recall, that he mentioned his grandmother, his white grandmother, used to make racist comments and had fears of black men. And instead of seeing that as just a moment of honesty, he obviously loved his grandmother. He wasn't trying to disrespect her. He was just saying, you know what, she grew up in this country and she internalized all the stuff that we all internalize, but the right wing went nuts and ballistic and said, oh, that's horrible. And then later when Henry Louis Gates was arrested, breaking into his own house, essentially, in Cambridge, Mass., and Barack Obama, an old friend of Skip Gates from when he was at Harvard, but also understanding the facts of the case, said, I think the Cambridge police acted stupidly. And everybody said, oh my God, how can you, and I think it was Rush Limbaugh that said, this is a black president ganging up on a white cop. But really what it was, he was making a very accurate statement. Why was it accurate? Well, because the Massachusetts Supreme Court has said that if you mouth off to a cop, which is all they said Skip Gates did, was that he gave him lip. I'm sure he did. They accused him of breaking into his own home. You would do that too. I would too. That mouthing off to a cop, cussing a cop, yelling at a cop, on your own property, and even not on your own property, is not against the law. So when they arrested him for disorderly conduct on the basis of him screaming at the cop, they were stupid. They didn't know the law that they were sworn to uphold. So when the president said that, you might not think that, that's a presidential word, stupid or stupidly, but he was right, and yet they lost their mind. Or when he, proposed a very mild healthcare reform that is certainly not what anyone on the left actually supports, he was accused by Glenn Beck of only doing healthcare as reparations for slavery, which again is just an example of no matter what this guy does, which is usually very weak T when it comes to issues of race, people are going to accuse him of being a divisive figure. So let's just be clear about that. For the first time in maybe 3 generations of white people, we're looking at a white community that is uncertain of its economic future, its cultural place, because the society's changing. Not only is there a president of color, there's a demographic shift. 30 years from now, half the country will be people of color, half will be white. There's a widespread cultural shift, obviously. They have a thoroughly multicultural popular culture, so that the icons of pop culture, the people in the posters on the children's walls in your kid's bedroom, even if you're a white middle-class suburban family, might be black and brown entertainers. And the economy, really still struggling to come out of the crisis of 07, 08. And so in a sense, if you got all that happening at once, black president, economic freefall, confronting you with an insecurity you haven't known since the Depression, a multicultural pop culture, a demographic shift, there are all these white folks who suddenly, when you talk about white privilege, right, they get, understandably, what are you talking about? Why, I'm not even going to be the normal American in 30 years. That fear that white folks have about being dispossessed of our country is only a fear that we have because we were lied to believe it was our country. In other words, white privilege set white people up. For some people, if you've been expecting a 9 or a 10 on a 1 to 10 scale, and now your life is only like a 6, you're done, man. You can't even know what to do with that. On the other hand, if you're somebody that's been struggling to get to a 5, and all of a sudden you're already at a 4, you might be thinking, well, it's rough, but you know what, I'm gonna keep at it. And so that's one of the reasons you have these polls that actually find black folks are the most optimistic folks in the country, which is crazy ironic because people of color, particularly African-American folks, still at the bottom, unemployment, twice the white rate, poverty 3 times the white rate, 1/20th the net worth and wealth, but they're more optimistic. White folks are the most pessimistic, even though we have 20 times the wealth, half the unemployment, 1/3 the poverty. The only explanation for that is that white folks are looking at a future where we don't get to call all the shots. So because we're losing hegemonic dominance, it's not that we're losing power, we still got plenty of power. It's not that we're losing access, we're always gonna have access. We're losing hegemony. And so people can't hear this white privilege message because they're thinking 30 years down, what are you talking about? They're coming for us. But I think one of the things that we don't fully appreciate is that the thing that's so pernicious about white supremacy that makes class-based politics so difficult here, as opposed to, let's say, in Europe, a lot of countries that the US likes to compare itself to, where class-based politics are very common. The reason that you can have working class folks voting against their economic interests in a place like this is because white supremacy has literally created almost like an alternative form of property. So this is not my argument, I mean it is, but it's Cheryl Harris, who's a law professor at UCLA, a brilliant legal scholar. She makes this argument, whiteness is property. So in other words, let's say I got nothing, but I got this right here, and I can bank this every day. Because I might not be really big at work, but at least I got my white skin. And by the same token, masculinity is property. So the fact that I'm a man under patriarchy makes me feel bigger than I really am. The fact that I'm straight, that's property. The fact that I'm, Christian in a Christian-dominated society, that's property. And so if I got nothing else going for me, I can bank all of these identities. And in a sense, it's hard to get through to working class and struggling white folks because if you want them to join a class-based struggle for economic justice, that takes a lot of work, right? Doesn't mean we don't want to do it, we're trying, but it's hard. Whereas I can just say, you know what, that's a lot of work. I'm just gonna rally around this property I've got right now, my whiteness, my maleness, my straightness, my Christian identity. And I think that's the nut we've got to figure out how to crack. And I don't know how to do it. The late Derek Bell talked about that being the holy grail of the anti-racist struggle, was figuring out how to get white folks to understand the toxicity of their very own systemic advantages. And we don't know how to do it yet, but we keep at it. I don't think there's any doubt that the vast majority of white folks are disempowered by their politics. But figuring out a way to build solidarity, that's what we've got to continue to do, by making sure that white folks understand we don't disrespect their struggle, those of us who fight racism against people of color. That struggle is the same struggle. It's a struggle against injustice, it's a struggle against oppression, it's a struggle against marginalization. I'll tell you what, the more the police officers in places like Ferguson keep pointing guns, not just at black and brown bodies, but at white bodies who have gone to join them in solidarity, they're teaching that lesson as well as I can ever teach it. So if there's anything that comes out of this, I hope it's the ability of white folks to see, this is what the state really thinks of you. You know, you think they like you because you're white and all, but the minute you actually speak up for justice and speak out against injustice, they will treat you this way. They will point the gun in your face. They will hit you with the tear gas canister. And at the end of the day, they're not really interested in you either. And I think when white people maybe begin to figure that out, when they begin to figure out that, you know, they'll cut your unemployment insurance too. They're not just going to cut theirs. They'll cut your food stamps. They'll cut your, you know, your Medicare benefits. You know, that's what they'll do. And I think some white folks wake up to that in the last few years because they saw unemployment benefits being slashed and they used to think, you know, welfare, quote unquote, was just for those folks. And then it's like, wait, but I don't get my unemployment insurance because y'all aren't going to extend it. Wait a minute, what? And all of a sudden people go, oh my God, this is terrible. So maybe there's this turning, but we have to continue to push it because there's no doubt that there's a lot of other folks on the other side who will continue to say, yeah, you don't have much, but at least you're not black.